We're halfway through the week. Hello and welcome to Arirang News. I'm Lee Jun in Seoul. Prosecutors are questioning former South Korean President Lee Myung-bak today over allegations of corruption, as he faces about 20 corruption charges, with some of his close aides having already been arrested for bribery. Now, this makes him the fifth former Korean president to be summoned for questioning by prosecutors on corruption allegations. And before we sit down with an expert to talk more about this, we first head over to the News Center, where Devin Whiting has the latest headlines at this hour. Hello, Devin.
Hi, Jiun. Former President Lee Myung-bak is being questioned, as you said, by prosecutors over a slew of corruption allegations. It's expected he'll be there all day today and long into the night. We'll now connect to our Kim Hae-sung, who's at the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. So, Hae-sung, can you give us a recap of what's happened there today and a little bit of background?
Devin, former President Lee Myung-bak appeared here at Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office slightly ahead of the scheduled time at around 9:22 in the morning after an 8-minute ride from his residence in southern Seoul. Before entering the building, he delivered his message before the photo line to the nation. Take a listen.
I'm very sorry for causing concern to the people amid the economic difficulties and the grave security situation surrounding the Korean peninsula. As a former president, I have a lot to say about this, but I will spare my words. I hope this will be the last such trouble in our history. I again express my apologies.
Lee is now the fifth former South Korean president to be investigated by the prosecution. He's accused of around 20 offenses, including bribery, embezzlement, and abuse of power. Over the past few months, state prosecutors have questioned numerous figures surrounding Lee, including his brothers and son, as well as the presidential secretaries who worked with him during his term between 2008 and 2013. And all that closed in on Lee today. But he has firmly denied all the allegations, calling the investigation against him political revenge by the current Moon Jae-in administration.
Right, so Hae-sung, Lee Myung-bak has been there since this morning, and I understand we have many more hours to go. What happens next?
So Lee is being investigated on the 10th floor, room 1001, the exact same place former President Park Geun-hye underwent a marathon questioning about a year ago. And the entire questioning will be video recorded as well. The interrogation began at 10 a.m. and ran through 1 p.m., and a second round began after lunch. Prosecutors first asked him about Das, a corruption-ridden auto parts company whose shares prosecutors have concluded are actually owned by Lee Myung-bak under various fake names. Lee is represented by 4 lawyers in the room, including his former presidential legal assistant, Kang Hoon, and is known to have denied all the allegations related to Das and the creation of slush funds. Because Lee is a former president, prosecutors hope to wrap up their questioning today and not summon him again. A senior prosecutor told journalists that Lee will be treated with dignity, but that the probe will be conducted thoroughly and transparently. The prosecutor said they have prepared around 120 pages of questions, which means interrogation is likely to stretch late into the night. The interrogation itself could end before midnight, but most don't think Lee will be able to leave before tomorrow morning after prosecutors take a quick look through their interrogation records through the night. The prosecution is expected to decide whether to request an arrest warrant for the former president within this week. Back to you, Devin.
All right, so many hours to go there still. Thank you, Hae-sung. We'll check back in with you later. Meanwhile, parties in the National Assembly are split over the questioning of the former president. Most of the parties called for a thorough investigation, but the conservative Liberty Korea Party said the probe is a tragedy and should not happen again. Kim Min-ji tells us more.
All but one political party called for a thorough investigation into former President Lee Myung-bak, who appeared for questioning on Wednesday over a string of bribery and other corruption charges. The main opposition Liberty Korea Party again called it a case of political revenge, accusing the current Liberal administration of using the investigation for political gain ahead of the June local elections.
This is a historic tragedy for the former president to undergo questioning by prosecutors, and I hope the politics of revenge will not be repeated.
The ruling Democratic Party of Korea called for the prosecution to carry out the probe according to the law and principles and leave no stone unturned. The party also criticized the former president for claiming the investigation is political retaliation.
The party said the fact that Lee is facing about 20 charges is enough to put him in the Guinness Book of World Records. The former president still denies these allegations and claims that this is political revenge.
The centrist Padamita party also called for a swift investigation, but also stressed the need to amend the constitution to limit presidential powers, saying the concentration of power leads to corruption.
This is all related to the so-called imperial presidential system. It shows how a 5-year term in office leads to involvement in abuse of power and corruption. And now President Moon Jae-in says he himself will fix the constitution and craft a proposal. That is also a display of authority.
The Liberal Party for Democracy and Peace said that while it's tragic for a former leader to undergo questioning, crimes have to be punished. The Progressive Justice Party was more or less on the same page, saying the prosecution must conduct a thorough probe to uncover the full truth. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
In other news, U.S. President Donald Trump has fired his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Trump dropped the news on Twitter, saying that Tillerson will be replaced by CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Tillerson's dismissal comes just weeks before the unprecedented summit between the U.S. and North Korea. Kim Hyo-sun tells us more.
President Trump has ousted his Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and replaced him with Mike Pompeo, the CIA chief. The surprising decision was announced via Trump's Twitter on Tuesday, through which he also thanked Tillerson for his 14 months of service. Explaining his decision to fire him, the president told reporters they had a different mindset and a different way of thinking. President Trump then added that he has a very similar thought process with Pompeo, who is notable for his hawkish attitude. Pompeo is known to have played a crucial role in agreeing on a summit between Washington and Pyongyang by closely coordinating with the South Korean government. Meanwhile, Tillerson told reporters he will leave the State Department at the end of the month.
My commission as Secretary of State will terminate at midnight, March the 31st. I'll now return to private life as a private citizen, as a proud American, proud of the opportunity I've had to serve my country.
Undersecretary of State Steve Goldstein was also fired after contradicting the official account of Tillerson's dismissal. Vacancies within the higher echelon of the State Department will present a major challenge for Pompeo as he prepares for an unprecedented meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un following his Senate's confirmation hearing in April. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Turning to the economy, employment figures for February were released today, and they show the number of newly employed rose at its slowest pace in 8 years, mainly due to sluggish auto sales following the shutdown of GM Korea's Gunsan plant and the cold weather last month. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The number of newly employed people in Korea increased by its slowest pace since 2010 in February, only edging up by 104,000. It's a sharp slowdown compared to preceding months. The number of newly employed rose in the range of 200,000 on year for 3 straight months leading up to December last year, and increased by 314,000 on year in January. Statistics Korea says the total number of people employed stood at over 26 million last month, and the increases came from the construction, defense, and public administration sectors. It attributes the downturn to the country's sluggish manufacturing, wholesale, and retail sectors and low economic activity due to last month's bitterly cold weather. The statistics agency also cited the shutdown of GM Korea's Gunsan auto plant to have contributed to sluggish sales in the auto sector, but said it's uncertain whether this year's minimum wage increase has played a role. The so-called real youth unemployment rate, which is the rate perceived by young people, stood at around 23%. Due to the worsening youth unemployment situation, the government is expected to unveil detailed measures to boost job creation on Thursday and is likely to push for a supplementary budget bill and tax benefits later this year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Perhaps the world's best-known scientist, Stephen Hawking, who inspired an interest in physics among millions of people, has died at the age of 76. His family confirmed in a statement that he died early Wednesday morning GMT at his home in Cambridge, England. Despite being diagnosed in his 20s with the normally fatal condition known as Lou Gehrig's disease, Hawking lived for another 50 years, pursuing what physicists call a unified theory of everything. He first came to prominence through his research on black holes in the 1970s when he was at Cambridge University. There he was a successor to Isaac Newton as the Lucasian professor of mathematics. He became a celebrity of sorts through his best-selling books and appearances on television and was known also for his great wit. Hawking's children, in their statement, said his legacy will live on for many years. I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
The day has finally come for ex-President Lee Myung-bak. The investigation into a laundry list of allegations linked to bribery and his family-owned auto parts company has been ongoing for months, and even more alleged shady dealings are coming to light. For a rundown of the legal strife the ex-leader finds himself in, here's our Park Hee-jun.
The day has come for former President Lee Myung-bak to face investigators at the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. Lee, who served as president from 2009 to 2013, becomes the fourth South Korean leader to appear for questioning as a suspect in a criminal case. Here's a wrap-up of the major charges he's facing. Evidence shows the former president received at least $1.63 million of illicit money from the National Intelligence Service and had it sent to the presidential office through his key aides. Prosecutors also suspect he received over $2 million from former CEO of Uri Financial Group, Lee Pal-sung, some of which was put toward Lee Myung-bak's 2007 presidential election campaign. Then there's a corruption-ridden auto parts company, DAS. Although documents point to his elder brother, prosecutors have concluded the company's real owner is Lee Myung-bak and that he holds over 80% of DAS shares under various fake names. One of the major allegations includes Samsung Group paying over $5.5 million in legal fees to a U.S. law firm to cover DAS's legal costs. Investigators also identified slush funds totaling to more than $28 million managed by DAS between 2003 and 2008. A large part of those funds are believed to be managed by Lee Myung-bak and his family. The net also appears to be closing in around Lee's family members. They interrogated Lee's brother and DAS chairman Lee Sang-eun, who was also the primary target of the DAS investigation. So was Lee Myung-bak's son, Lee Si-young, an executive of the company. Meanwhile, Lee's eldest brother and former lawmaker Lee Sang-duk was summoned for bribery allegations, mainly on receiving dirty money from the intelligence agency and Lee Pal-sung for the ex-president. Also accused of bribery, Lee's son-in-law Lee Sang-ju, an executive at Samsung Electronics and husband to the former president's eldest daughter. Both have admitted to some of their charges. But the former president's charges extend beyond bribery. Lee Myung-bak faces additional charges related to violation of law on the management of presidential records and violations related to election law. He's expected to continue to deny all the allegations during his interrogation. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
To tell us more about the prosecutor's investigation into corruption allegations against former President Lee Myung-bak, Professor Song Se-ryun from Kyung University joins us in the studio today. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
All right, so the investigation into ex-President Lee means that 5 former Korean presidents have been summoned by prosecutors on corruption allegations. Now, as he arrived at the prosecutor's office in Seoul this morning, former President Lee Myung-bak said that he is sorry for causing concern to the people of Korea. And he also said that he hopes to be the last person or last former president to be standing here. Now, tell us more about the overall situation.
I think, as you mentioned, he's referring exactly to the kind of recurring problems that we have. Every president, when their term is over, tends to be a subject of investigation by special prosecutors and prosecutorial team, and the end is not really good. We are seeing the unfolding of former President Park Geun-hye's affairs. She's in jail. Roh Moo-hyun, under similar charges, actually committed suicide, and this former President Lee is also facing similar charges. As you can see, there are kind of similar circumstances, similar charges, and probably that it points to kind of structural problems as well as the kind of cultural political issues. So I think he's referring to that situation, kind of characterizing as this is a political revenge, kind of vindictive political culture in Korea. So
and he's a victim.
Right. I think he is right. Whether his characterization of himself being a victim is right or wrong, this culture has to stop.
All right. Well, a senior prosecutor received E before he was ushered into room 1001, which is the exact same place where former ousted President Park Geun-hye underwent some marathon questioning. Now, how are former presidents here in Korea summoned and questioned by prosecutors?
I think that there is a kind of established decorum. They are referred to as Mr. President, 대통령님, and they use the same room. That room has an adjoining room, which has a sofa, bed, and a place for rest if need be. And the whole session is recorded by consent, and several prosecutors and other personnel will be present. So I think that there will be a kind of they'll be abiding by the decorum internally established.
But their questioning will be, focused on some of they won't just pass by it because he's the former president, right?
Right. It will be a grueling session. I think that it will be long, and they have 20 counts of allegation, and reportedly they have more than 120 questions to go through. So even if he denies everything, I think they would want those responses to be put on record first and go through every single details so that, as the prosecutors already said, that this is a one-time session unless there is a arrest warrant. So they will try to be comprehensive and thorough.
Now, like you said, he faces about 20 alleged offenses. Tell us more about those offenses and what kind of sentence in regards to those offenses may be.
The reporter has a pretty good rundown of it. The bribery charges, abuse of power, embezzlement, election violations, /offense, and so on and so forth. These are remarkably very similar to other president's charges, especially when it comes to bribery, corruption charges, abuse of power. So I guess there is some structural issues where safeguard needs to be. I think that bribery charges is the most serious one because it has on the book highest jail terms at 10 years, and it could go higher. And also, it seems to me that the prosecution has secured a pretty tight evidence because they already secured the witness accounts regarding these issues. So in terms of jail terms, in terms of severity of it, those are the focus.
Now, but former President Lee has been denying all allegations against him. So what could be his reasons for that?
I think that there's several reasons. One is probably the structural issue as well. There is always, in terms of making decisions at the top and the policy decisions, there are always winners and losers, and there are bound to be some resentments. And because of the checks and balance system has not been working, and I think that Korea has been working kind of surreptitiously on their kind of assumption of the president being sort of like a benign monarch. I mean, not on the books, but the culture has been that way. So there's a lot of loopholes that the people kind of exploit or take advantage of. I think he's trying to say that. And also he's characterizing as this is the scenarios made up to support the political revenge situation. So I think he's trying to make it into kind of legal trouble, but to more having a political motivations.
Where does the statute of limitations on his allegations come in?
A statute of limitation, especially the serious ones, usually 10 years, bribery charges. And that has considered to be a big hurdle at first, but they are applying this legal theory that the series of actions that are similar in nature can be grouped into one big activity. So if you can You can take, for example, embezzlement or bribery. If there are several accounts or several different incidents of that, if you can group them all together, you only counted the last one, which would start the triggering of the statute of limitations. So under that theory, that hurdle is overcome.
Now, Mr. Yi is also accused of embezzling millions of dollars from DAS, which is an auto parts company that he allegedly owns under the name of his relatives. Now, if this turns out to be true, then what could the sentence be on that regards?
Well, he's been consistent in denying charges, of course. If he's the real owner, under our real name law, there's a tax evasion issues. And also, probably the biggest two of them is one, embezzlement, because there was a previous incident where one of the accountants has embezzled money. Back then, the connection was not made, but later on, because of the investigation, they established that, or allege that the former President Lee has been in committee with the action. So if it is true, then that the same crime becomes President Lee's crime. And also, it's related to kind of former old name of BBK, which was investigated and at that time proven not to be substantiating any criminal activities on the President Lee. The DAS has invested a certain amount of money to BBK. And BBK is investment company, so if they lose, then those who took the risk of investing in that company kind of loses out. That's no problem. But BBK has returned the investment money to DAS, and the allegation is that the President Lee, because it's his company, he has used his influence as a president and power to get the money back. So it goes to the abuse of power issue.
All right. Then what about the presidential files that were also found in the basement of a Seoul building owned by Mr. Yi's Cheonghae Foundation?
Right. Under the law, presidential records are not supposed to be released or out of the designated area. So if you find it, just as happened in President Park's case, President Roh's case, is per se violation. How severe it is, if those records are taken out without being first deposited to the designated place. So if it's just a copy, then probably the severity of the violation is not going to be high. But if sensitive documents or something that has to be really in the designated area, if those are taken out, probably that would attach certain punishment.
Now, what happens after today?
Well, this is the investigation or QA session, but even if President Lee denies everything, that the record is established from which they can compare the notes. And I think the biggest thing to look at is whether he is arrested. And the investigation continues under arrest after that arrangement. I think the prosecution has enough to do that if they want to. The necessary elements are already there. The question is whether there is a danger of him destroying evidences or fleeing, or another criteria is that whether the whole affair is serious enough that he should be put in custody. I think that the prosecution has no qualms about arresting him at this point. Probably because of the decorum, they will not do it today. That's the minimum of what they want to kind of keep. But beginning even early as tomorrow, it could happen if they are confident that they have enough materials to substantiate the arrest request.
So going back to number one, I mean, what should be done in order for us to not see another former president standing for questioning or summoned for questioning by prosecutors?
Right. I think that this is a complex issue because Korea has developed with a pretty well-executed government-private sector collaboration. You know, that produced pretty good growth. But the dark side or underside of that is that closeness bred a lot of kind of corruption issues, slush funds. And, you know, reality is that the politics needs funding. And I think one of the reforms that we could think about is how to enforce or to strengthen the checks and balance system on the power of the president and the executive actions. I mean, even then, I think we have the necessary factors in place, but we could accuse the National Assembly to have neglected their duty for the checks and balances while his presidency was in season. So I think that we can strengthen that, but at the same time, if the financing, election financing and the political contribution and as related the lobbying activities, I think those should be subject of reform measures so that they'll know exactly and clearly what you can do and you cannot do in Korean politics. Okay. Right? I think that kind of clarification could boost the chance that we will avoid this kind of instances, and I think that it should stop. I mean, Korea has developed in many different areas, including culture, but the political institution has been lagging behind very seriously. And today's the investigation Q&A session is another testament to that, and I think we should improve.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our program, but make sure to tune in to Arirang News for more domestic and global news updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching and goodbye.
In search of timeless and priceless heritage in Korea,